Hello, General Hospital today will reveal, in the aftermath of the blizzard's chaos, when nearly every citizen of Port Charles had a role to play in saving lives or seeking shelter, one notable absence looms larger than expected: Willow Kane. While others were preoccupied with triage, evacuations, and frantic search and rescue operations, Willow remained curiously off the grid. Her return, however, was not met with relief, but with dread, as if it became clear that she had not been idle during her disappearance. Instead, she was orchestrating the next phase of her silent but calculated campaign for dominance. The supposed caretaker who once won hearts with her gentle demeanor and altruistic nursing instincts had undergone a transformation, one both chilling and profound. The Willow who returned was not the same woman many thought they knew. She was colder, more deliberate, and shockingly capable of cruelty cloaked in compassion. When she brought Drew home, it wasn't to comfort him or ensure a peaceful recovery. It was to begin her reign of total psychological control. The house she prepared was not a sanctuary, it was a cell, pristine and well-equipped, but with a sinister undertone. Every medical device had a purpose, every piece of furniture placed to ensure visibility, access, and containment. Drew, trapped in his own body, was now at the mercy of a woman he had once trusted, even loved. She dressed him in soft, unthreatening tones, gently fixed his hair, and ensured the lighting in his room was always warm and serene. But beneath this carefully curated image of caregiving was a festering truth. Drew was not a patient, he was a prisoner. In his immobile state, the echoes of the syringe incident returned with cruel clarity. He remembered the exact sensation, the sting of the injection, and the blurred vision that followed. He remembered Willow's face, calm, serene, yet strangely devoid of empathy. That moment, once hazy, now burned vividly in his mind. It hadn't been an accident. It had been an act of intentional harm. Willow, on the other hand, spoke in gentle tones, praised his strength, and occasionally reassured him that she was doing what was best. Her words were honeyed, her soft touch, yet every decision she made robbed Drew of agency. She rationed his medications on her own timetable, filtered what information he received from the outside world, and ensured that every visitor only saw a curated version of reality. Drew's struggle wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't alert anyone to the twisted performance that unfolded daily in his presence, and Willow thrived in that silence. She grew bolder, even indulgent, knowing that there were no witnesses and no consequences. She began to confide in him as though he were a confidant, sharing insights, plans, and even darker thoughts under the assumption that he could never act on them. Her mask of sweetness never slipped in public. To the rest of Port Charles, she was the devoted wife who had been through too much and yet continued to stand tall. She reminded everyone that Drew needed peace, that visits should be brief, and that medical professionals only confused him. She was polite, courteous, even charming, but always firm. No one questioned her, especially after the hospital board praised her for her resilience. But those who looked closely, those who knew how to read silence, could tell something was deeply wrong. Drew's eyes followed people desperately, flickering with panic when someone approached, then dimming again when they left, unaware of the hidden torment. Privately, Willow indulged in small acts of domination. She would play audio recordings of their happier times, whispering reminders of loyalty and betrayal, toasting memories to fit her narrative. She rewrote the past with chilling ease, painting herself as the savior and Drew as the confused, damaged soul lucky to have her. Sometimes she sat beside him late into the night, reading old journals aloud and pausing only to ask rhetorical questions he could never answer. Other nights, she kept the room completely dark, allowing silence and dread to settle over him like a second skin. And in that quiet, Drew's thoughts raced with fury, fear, and grief, at the betrayal, at the helplessness, at the dawning realization that no one suspected Willow could ever be capable of such cruelty. The few who came close to noticing something off about Willow's behavior were quickly deflected. Carly sensed something in Willow's tone when she offered updates but dismissed it as exhaustion. Nina, ironically, had once received a familiar promise from Willow, the assurance that she would make sure everything was taken care of. Now that promise echoed with a different meaning. Willow had not just taken control, She had seized it with frightening confidence, reshaping her environment into a world where Drew existed only as a symbol of her power. Her manipulation extended beyond the house as well. She intercepted mail, selectively responded to calls, and created the illusion of full transparency while tightening her grip behind the scenes. This control was not rooted in affection but in possession. Drew had once given her his trust, and now she twisted it like a blade. She saw herself not as a villain but as a guardian of order in a world that had gone awry. She believed she was protecting Drew from himself, from outside influence, from chaos. But in truth, she was feeding her own hunger to be needed desperately, irrevocably, exclusively. And with Drew incapable of resistance, her delusion grew unchecked. What began as subtle manipulation quickly metastasized into psychological torment. As the week progressed, Drew's condition became a cautionary tale of what happens when trust is misplaced. When a caregiver becomes a captor, Willow stood at the center of it all, poised, smiling, and applauded by the world for her strength. Yet behind the curtain, she orchestrated a performance darker than anyone could imagine. Her transformation was complete. The woman who once stood for light had embraced the shadows, and those shadows now cloaked the man she claimed to love. What happens next remains to be seen, but chaos is not a possibility. It is a certainty. And the question is not whether Willow's world will collapse, but how many lives it will shatter in the process. Drew exists in a state that defies ordinary suffering, trapped inside a body that no longer obeys him. Sealed off from the world by silence and immobility. His mind remains painfully alert, fully aware of every sound, every shift of light, every presence that enters the room, yet he is incapable of responding in any way that might save him. This paralysis is not merely physical, it is existential. He is forced to endure each moment without the dignity of reaction, without the power to resist, and without the ability to warn anyone of the danger that surrounds him. The body that once carried him through battle's rescues and hard-earned victories has become a prison built by someone he trusted. And that betrayal is the cruelest aspect of his confinement. As the days stretch on, Drew's thoughts turn inward, replaying fragmented memories with growing clarity. The stroke that shattered his autonomy no longer feels like an inexplicable medical catastrophe. The more he re-examines the sequence of events, the more certain details begin to align in a way that chills him. Willow was there at every critical moment, calm and composed, always just ahead of the doctors. Always one step closer than anyone else. Her presence was constant, her control absolute. What once appeared as devotion now feels calculated. The realization creeps in slowly but relentlessly. This was not an accident, and it may not have been limited to a syringe or a single medical decision. Drew begins to suspect that Willow did not merely incapacitate him, she may have orchestrated every step that led to Beatty. This outcome including the violent act that nearly ended his life. The suspicion that Willow could be the one who shot him takes root in his mind like a poison that cannot be expelled. It explains too much to be ignored. Her ability to manipulate circumstances to stay untouched by consequences, to move through the aftermath of violence with unnerving ease all point toward a darker truth. Drew's inability to confront her, to demand answers, or even to show fear becomes part of her advantage. She watches him closely, reads his eyes, interprets his silence as submission, and uses it to reinforce her dominance. In this state, Drew is not only silenced, he is erased as a threat. Eventually, Willow no longer needs to hide behind ambiguity. Safe from legal consequences, insulated by public sympathy and procedural loopholes, she stands untouchable. The justice system has failed to reach her and she knows it. That knowledge emboldens her. The careful restraint she once exercised begins to dissolve, replaced by something sharper and more openly cruel. She no longer fears what Drew might know because she understands what he cannot do. The truth once dangerous becomes a tool she can wield for her own satisfaction. When Willow finally confirms Drew's worst suspicions, the impact is devastating not because of the revelation itself, but because of how and when it is delivered. The confirmation is not presented as a confession born of guilt, but as an assertion of power. She has won and she wants him to understand that fully. The shock that follows is not the kind that comes from surprise alone, but from the crushing realization that his fate has been sealed by someone who feels no remorse. According to leaked information from General Hospital, Drew will be described as stunned in the episode airing on February 5, but that word barely captures the depth of what he experiences. This is not a momentary shock. It is the collapse of hope itself. What unsettles Drew most is the understanding that the truth being revealed may extend far beyond Willow admitting to pulling the trigger. At this point, such an admission should not astonish him. The real horror lies in what else she may expose, how long she has been planning this, how deeply she has manipulated those around them, and how intentionally she has engineered his suffering. The revelation threatens to reframe everything Drew believed about his past, his marriage, and the people he trusted to protect him. It suggests that his paralysis is not an unfortunate consequence of violence, but a carefully designed outcome meant to ensure his silence. As Drew absorbs this truth trapped behind unresponsive muscles and an unyielding stillness, the chaos does not erupt outwardly. Instead, it implodes within him. Rage, grief, disbelief, and despair collide in a storm he cannot express. Willow stands free unpunished and fully aware that the man who knows her darkest secret is incapable of exposing it. In that imbalance lies the true horror of Drew's situation. He is alive, conscious, and aware, yet powerless to stop the person who destroyed him. And as the layers of Willow's deception continue to unfold, it becomes increasingly clear that this story is not just about survival, but about the terrifying consequences of unchecked control, where the most dangerous weapon is not violence itself, but the silence forced upon its victim. Willow may very well resort to delivering veiled threats cloaked in sweetness, or perhaps abandon the pretense altogether. A statement like "he should have wished he were dead" would not be beyond her now. In fact, she might choose an even more chilling route, suggesting that Drew should be grateful for his current paralysis, that if he were ever to recover fully, he might regret it. Such insinuations are far more effective than overt threats, especially when whispered into the ears of a man who cannot defend himself. There is a certain cruelty in reminding someone that survival might have been the worst outcome, and Willow could savor the twisted power of that moment. If Drew ever does regain enough strength to speak or even attempt to stand, Willow may threaten to ensure he stays silent forever, reinforcing the idea that his future is no longer his own. These threats wouldn't need to be frequent. A single calculated remark could be enough to plunge Drew back into terror. But it's clear that Willow operates with a keen sense of psychological precision. She doesn't lash out indiscriminately. Instead, she applies pressure strategically, always aware of the limits of her victim's endurance. In Drew's case, she may feel emboldened by the fact that his doctors remain skeptical about the possibility of a full recovery. If medical professionals themselves have little hope, then why should Willow fear any retaliation? She may see his condition as a permanent safeguard, his silence guaranteed. Not by loyalty, but by physical incapacity. This illusion of invulnerability allows her to lower her guard and become more brazen in her cruelty. Rather than simply hiding behind her role as a caregiver, Willow could begin to weaponize that identity. Every act of kindness becomes conditional. Every moment of care becomes an opportunity to assert dominance. She might speak to Drew in condescending tones, describing her day, casually mentioning how everyone believes she's a hero, and how no one would believe his version of events if he could even manage to tell it. Her sense of vindication may even grow stronger over time. In her eyes, Drew destroyed her life, or at least prevented it from becoming what she had envisioned. Whether that means exposing secrets, withholding affection, or aligning himself with those she now considers enemies, Willow could view his